Boa tarde, meu nome é Valdirene Gomes e eu gostaria de agradecer a todas as pessoas que estão nos acompanhando, tanto presencialmente quanto virtualmente. Gostaria de avisar que o nosso seminário ele será bilíngue, então boas-vindas a todos no nosso seminário de Languages in the Internationalisation of Higher Education Institutions. Deixa eu me apresentar, né? Eu sou professora adjunta da área de inglês da Faculdade de Letras há 28 anos. Eu tenho experiência no ensino de inglês como língua estrangeira e também para propósitos específicos. Minhas áreas de interesse são fonética e fonologia, formação de professores e internacionalização. Hoje eu estarei moderando esse evento, né, e eu espero que seja muito proveitoso para todos nós. Desde já eu agradeço a presença de todas as pessoas que estão nos acompanhando. Eu vou apresentar os nossos palestrantes que nós temos conosco hoje. Como esse é um seminário bilíngue, né, as apresentações também serão em duas línguas. Então, primeiramente, eu quero apresentar a professora Thelma Jimenez. She's a senior professor at Universidade Estadual de Londrina, postgraduate program in language studies. She holds a PhD in applied linguistics from Lancaster University, UK. Her current research interests are in the areas of English as a global language, internationalization of higher education, and language policies. She's a researcher funded by CNPq, Science and Technology Agency, and has published more than 100 publications in referred journals, book chapters, and conference proceedings. She co-leads the Brazilian network of English as a Lingua Franca researchers. Nosso segundo palestrante é o professor Gabriel Brito. O professor Gabriel, ele possui doutorado pela USP, doutor em estudos linguísticos, linha de pesquisa em linguística aplicada pela Universidade Federal do Espírito Santo, mestre pela West Virginia University, graduação pela Universidade Federal do Espírito Santo, tem experiência na área de ensino de língua inglesa como língua estrangeira e segunda língua, tanto no Brasil como nos Estados Unidos, é professor adjunto do Departamento de Línguas Estrangeiras na Faculdade de Letras da Universidade Federal de Goiás. Sua área de pesquisa é a internacionalização do ensino superior no Brasil, mais especificamente na avaliação do processo de internacionalização do país. Atualmente, ele co-coordena o grupo de estudos de pesquisa do CNPq EMIT, Educação, Multilinguismo, Internacionalização, Tecnologia e Inglês. E, além disso, ele tem interesse pela área de linguística, com ênfase em linguística aplicada, metodologias, ensino de língua estrangeira, formação de professores, criação de material didático, tecnologias na educação e avaliação. Nossa terceira participante é a doutora Ana Souza. She's a lecturer at the Federal University of Goiás, a senior collaborator in the postgraduate program of linguistics at the University of Brasilia in Brazil, and a visiting academic at Oxford Brookes University in England. Her research interests include bilingualism, language and identity, language planning, family and migrant churches, complementary schools, the teaching of Portuguese as a heritage language, the training of language teachers, and EMI. She has published several articles, chapters, and books in these fields. She coordinates the research group Multifair, Multilingualism in Family, Religious, and Educational Contexts, which is organizing this event. Nosso quarto palestrante, que também é o nosso debatedor, é o professor David Bloch. David Bloch is honorary professor of Sociolinguistics in the Department do Universitat Pompeu Fabra, Barcelona. He has researched a wide range of language-related topics, drawing on his readings in political economy, history, sociology, anthropology, and geography. His recent books are Political Economy and Social Linguistics, Post-Truth and Political Discourse, The Secret Life of English Medium Instruction, which he co-edited with Sarah Khan, Innovations and Challenges in Identity Research, and Interviews in Applied Linguistic, Autobiographical Reflections on Research Processes, with Will Stevenson. He co-edited the Routledge book series Language, Society and Political Economy. Bom, tendo apresentado os nossos palestrantes, né, eu gostaria de iniciar a minha fala, e eu vou fazer uma fala breve sobre as políticas linguísticas e os projetos da UFG, e em seguida os demais professores também farão as suas falas. No final das apresentações, nós teremos um momento com o professor David, em que ele fará o debate, né, e fará perguntas aos palestrantes. Em seguida, nós teremos um momento de perguntas para os participantes, e as perguntas poderão ser feitas em inglês ou português. Ok? Bom, as línguas, elas desempenham um papel fundamental na internacionalização das instituições de ensino superior. Então, à medida que as universidades e as faculdades se envolvem cada vez mais na colaboração global, elas tentam recrutar estudantes internacionais, expandem o seu alcance acadêmico além fronteiras, e a diversidade linguística e o multilinguismo tornam-se facilitadores cruciais para a promoção de ambientes inclusivos e globalmente conectados, né? Como que essas línguas podem estar presentes no contexto acadêmico? Bom, então, antes de falar diretamente sobre os papéis das línguas, né, o papel que elas desempenham na UFG, eu vou falar sobre as políticas que norteiam o trabalho linguístico e algumas das atividades que são desenvolvidas em relação ao acesso à aprendizagem dessas línguas. Próximo, por favor, Júlia. Bom, eu sou membro do Conselho de Políticas Linguísticas da universidade, e esse conselho ele é um órgão consultivo, que ele é responsável por propor, discutir e implementar políticas linguísticas na nossa instituição. Ele tem o objetivo de promover e garantir o uso e o desenvolvimento de múltiplas línguas. Nos contextos acadêmico, administrativo e social, com atenção especial para a promoção do português como uma língua de acolhimento e também a inclusão das línguas indígenas e de sinais e, claro, a promoção de línguas estrangeiras. Então, tudo isso ocorre ao mesmo tempo, né? A promoção das línguas estrangeiras com a promoção das outras línguas que nós temos em uso na nossa instituição. Bom, os membros do Conselho, eles representam departamentos estratégicos da UFG, e eles são indicados pela reitoria. Na verdade, o Conselho faz a solicitação de indicação, a reitoria faz o convite, né, aos seus membros, nada é imposto, as pessoas podem se voluntariar para estar presentes nesse Conselho, né? E esse Conselho, ele tenta ser o mais diverso possível. Como vocês veem aí, nós temos representantes das pró-reitorias, nós temos representante da Secretaria de Inclusão, da Secretaria de Relações Internacionais, do Comitê de Idiomas, representante dos técnico-administrativos e dos discentes de pós-graduação. Então, todas essas categorias, elas estão envolvidas. E por que um Conselho de Políticas Linguísticas, ele não é uma coisa dos departamentos de línguas estrangeiras, né? Somente os que lidam com línguas estrangeiras? Porque é muito melhor que todos os órgãos estratégicos da universidade eles estejam diretamente ligados com esse trabalho, porque eles podem também trazer informações para as pessoas que lidam com o desenvolvimento linguístico, informações que elas não possuem, né? Por exemplo, nós temos informações que vêm da graduação, da pós-graduação, da extensão, dos assuntos estudantis, da inclusão, das relações internacionais. Então, tudo isso já convive, né, e colabora de forma simultânea, tudo ao mesmo tempo. Porque se nós fizéssemos as nossas discussões e ainda fôssemos buscar essas informações, não seria tão produtivo. E também porque é necessário que seja assim, né? As coisas na universidade, elas estão todas ligadas. Então, a promoção da diversidade linguística, da interculturalidade, da internacionalização, da inclusão, ela não pode acontecer sem que essas áreas estratégicas estejam juntas. Os objetivos, nós vimos o objetivo principal e os demais objetivos do Conselho e assegurar que os direitos linguísticos dentro da comunidade universitária estejam alinhados com objetivos maiores, né, da inclusão, da internacionalização, do reconhecimento cultural. Então, o Conselho ele pode propor programas educacionais, projetos de pesquisa e políticas públicas, né, que vão ajudar a resolver essas questões linguísticas, esses desafios linguísticos, né, e promover a aprendizagem de língua e o diálogo intercultural. Por que o Conselho trabalha dessa maneira, né? É necessário que os direitos linguísticos eles sejam assegurados. Quando a gente pensa no processo de internacionalização, a gente logo pensa em línguas estrangeiras. Mas em termos de línguas, há várias coisas acontecendo na universidade, né? Nós temos, por exemplo, alunos que são brasileiros, mas eles não têm a língua portuguesa como a sua língua materna. Nós temos alunos surdos, aqui na UFG principalmente, né, uma quantidade considerável, porque nós temos o curso de Libras como uma das nossas habilitações, e esses alunos de Libras, eles, por exemplo, não leem em uma língua estrangeira, pelo menos não em sua maioria, né? Muitos deles não sinalizam em outras línguas que não seja a língua brasileira de sinais. No curso de licenciatura intercultural indígena, nós também temos essa questão do português, né, que não é a língua materna de todos, e aí a gente pode até questionar, né, mas se os alunos chegaram à universidade, eles passaram por várias etapas, por Enem, né, e várias etapas de estudo, como que eles não dominam a língua? Eles podem até dominar num nível mais básico, mas quando chegam na universidade, eles estão num nível mais complexo. Então, pode ser que eles tenham dificuldade de acesso, em algum momento, a coisas importantes. Por exemplo, como conselho consultivo, outro dia nós recebemos uma demanda vinda da área de Libras, em que havia essa solicitação que documentos estratégicos da universidade eles fossem traduzidos para Libras ou disponibilizados de alguma forma, né? Porque os alunos de Libras, alguns têm dificuldades em compreender a língua portuguesa. Então, tem que haver esse trabalho para que todos os alunos tenham acesso, né? E aí, o que o Conselho faz nesse sentido? Ele busca soluções, ele propõe encaminhamentos, né? Isso parece uma coisa simples, mas falta pessoal para fazer tudo isso, é uma tarefa muito pesada, que envolve muito tempo para ser feita, né? Não é uma coisa simples de tradução de um documento, tem a questão da produção do audiovisual, né, para as línguas sinalizadas, tem a questão da tradução nas línguas que os alunos conseguem ler, e não há pessoal suficiente, infelizmente, para esse tipo de coisa, pelo menos não no momento, né? Então, o Conselho tem que ajudar a pensar caminhos, né, para que a solução seja entregue de alguma forma, porque a demanda existe, a necessidade existe, né? Então, quando a gente pensa nas línguas que estão dentro da universidade, a gente tem que pensar em todos os contextos e não, às vezes, favorecendo um contexto e deixando o outro sem ser atendido, né? Bom, dentro da estrutura do Conselho de Políticas Linguísticas está o Comitê de Idiomas, que é formado, ele também é um corpo consultivo, né? E Os seus objetivos são de desenvolver e coordenar iniciativas relacionadas às línguas na universidade, promover o multilinguismo e melhorar o ensino e a aprendizagem de língua na instituição, com suporte aos contextos acadêmico e administrativo. Parece uma tarefa simples, mas também não é muito simples, né, que a gente consiga alcançar tudo isso. Como que o conselho é formado? Aliás, o comitê, desculpem. O comitê também ele tem membros, né, de vários locais. Nesse caso aqui, ele está concentrado dentro do Departamento de Línguas Estrangeiras da Faculdade de Letras, e também nós temos professores do CEPAI, né, que é o Centro de Ensino e Pesquisa Aplicada à Educação. Mas não precisa ser somente assim. Qualquer professor que tenha um trabalho ligado às línguas, ele pode participar do comitê, né, desde que ele tenha um trabalho sendo desenvolvido. Por exemplo, pode ser um professor que dá aula do conteúdo dele em línguas estrangeiras, pode ser um professor que desenvolve projetos com outras universidades, ele tem grupos de estudo, pesquisas acontecendo em línguas estrangeiras, pode ser professores que participam de bancas de avaliação de proficiência, né, em áreas específicas. Então, nós não temos a língua estrangeira concentrada só no Departamento de Línguas Estrangeiras da universidade. No momento, o comitê está formado assim, porque houve solicitação do conselho e nem todos departamentos responderam, alguns responderam que não havia pessoal para indicar, ou que não havia, né, convite aceito. Aliás, foi muito pouco isso, e os departamentos que responderam foram realmente o de Línguas Estrangeiras da Faculdade de Letras e Colégio de Aplicação. Então, nós temos aí professores que representam as áreas de inglês, francês, espanhol, italiano, português para estrangeiros, libras e línguas indígenas. Então, são as línguas que são mais trabalhadas na universidade. Mas, por exemplo, se em algum momento tiver um professor que trabalhe uma língua que não seja estas, né, ele pode se voluntariar para estar no conselho, e essa língua ela vai ser incluída, e todos os projetos relacionados a essa língua também serão discutidos. Bom, o comitê ele funciona sob demanda do Conselho de Políticas Linguísticas. Então, geralmente as atividades são realizadas somente quando o conselho faz alguma solicitação. Então, recentemente, como exemplo de atividade que foi realizada pelo Comitê de Idiomas, nós temos parte, né, nas diretrizes para a pós-graduação, que foi uma lista de exames de proficiência que podem ser utilizados para a admissão de alunos nos programas de pós-graduação. Esse documento está disponível nesse link que aparece aí no slide, e ele é um documento que prevê várias situações dentro da pós-graduação no que diz respeito às línguas, e a última parte é um anexo que contém essa lista de exames de proficiência. Então, esse é o documento de políticas linguísticas que foi elaborado pelo Conselho. E esse, apesar de estar pequenininho, é o início do anexo, né? Ele é bem mais longo. Aqui a gente vê que começam a aparecer os exames relacionados a espanhol. Então, são os exames principais, que geralmente, quando a gente fala sobre exames de proficiência, né, são os mais citados. Mas também, além desses exames, são colocadas outras possibilidades para os alunos, né, que são os exames realizados por projetos como o CASA, que nós temos aqui na Faculdade de Letras, a pró-reitoria, uma das pró-reitorias, né, de pesquisa, ela oferece também o exame aliás, a Pró-Reitoria de Pós-Graduação, ela oferece o exame 2 vezes gratuitamente, né, ao ano, então amplia a oportunidade de os alunos passarem por esses exames de proficiência. E essa lista, ela é uma sugestão, na verdade, né? Não há imposição para os programas. Como eu disse, alguns professores, eles trabalham em bancas avaliadoras específicas. Então, pode ser que dentro de um curso há professores, né, com proficiência linguística e que queiram avaliar os seus alunos em áreas específicas, porque geralmente os testes eles são feitos de modo mais geral, né? Os textos são mais gerais. Os professores que fazem questão de fazerem de modo específico, eles podem. Então, é um documento que ele norteia as práticas, ele ajuda, ele auxilia os coordenadores de programas, né, mas não é uma coisa impositiva. Bom, ainda como atividade, né, atividades ligadas às determinações do Conselho, a gente teve um curso, há um tempo atrás, que foi ministrado para professores da universidade que gostariam de ministrar os seus conteúdos em língua estrangeira. Esse curso foi dado por mim, pela professora Eliane Carolina, e ele apresentava para esses professores as metodologias de CLIL, de EMI e CBI, né? A primeira sendo Content and Language Integrated Learning, EMI, English as a Medium of Instruction, and o CBI, Content-Based Instruction. E os professores, eles eram proficientes, mas eles não sabiam como começar a dar essas aulas. Então, nós tivemos, entre semestres, né, e esse momento para dar o curso, ele foi pensado da seguinte forma, para que os professores tivessem tempo de se familiarizar, né, para dar esses cursos, e também para conhecer a teoria, para escolher as matérias que seriam dadas, né, por meio da língua estrangeira. E aí os professores tiveram esse mini curso, e no semestre em que esse mini curso foi ministrado, foi possível para a Secretaria de Relações Internacionais ter uma lista de 16 disciplinas, né, que foram dadas. Elas foram dadas em diferentes áreas, porque havia professores, né, que eram oriundos de diferentes áreas. Recentemente, ainda vi na lista de cursos alguns que estão sendo dados, bem menos, né, hoje em dia, e eu acredito que um dos motivos, né, pelos quais os cursos foram diminuindo é que os alunos proficientes, eles foram captados num primeiro momento, e aí depois os professores precisam aguardar que novos alunos proficientes cheguem. As disciplinas escolhidas, elas foram disciplinas de núcleo livre, né, para garantir que os alunos teriam escolhas. Então, as disciplinas obrigatórias, elas não entraram nessa lista de cursos que foram ministrados em língua estrangeira. Aqui na Faculdade de Letras também nós temos algumas disciplinas que são ministradas para alunos, né, de outras unidades. Nossos alunos fazem aulas com esses alunos que vêm de outras unidades. Então, nos outros departamentos, eles também tiveram disciplinas desse tipo, só que elas eram um pouco mais específicas. Então, elas eram mais voltadas para os alunos do próprio curso. Enfim, aqui temos fotos dos professores, né, do curso ocorrendo. Esse curso ele propiciou que outras atividades fossem relacionadas, e o trabalho online ele também propiciou que outras experiências acontecessem. Então, nós tivemos atividades interdisciplinares ocorrendo, né, entre faculdades. Por exemplo, eu participei de um curso de fisiologia junto com um professor de biologia, dando aula para alunos do curso de medicina. Nós tivemos cursos ocorrendo em foil e teletandem, que são também outras modalidades de de troca linguística, né, internacional. Por fim, uma das atividades do Conselho, no momento, né, é o mapeamento linguístico da comunidade universitária. Então, nós fizemos um levantamento através de questionário. Ali não está dando para ver, mas foram mais de 2.500 respostas, né? Se nós compararmos com o número de professores, alunos, servidores, representa um pouco menos de 10%, mas já é uma ótima amostra. O questionário tinha várias perguntas, né? Entre elas, qual era a língua materna, qual era a segunda, terceira, quarta língua que a pessoa conhecia ou fazia uso, em que línguas ela lê e fala com mais facilidade. E por que o Conselho está fazendo esse mapeamento? Porque antes de propor grandes ações, sejam elas de internacionalização ou de outros tipos, é preciso saber sobre o conhecimento linguístico da comunidade universitária, né, o que eles já conhecem, o que eles precisam e o que eles gostariam, né, em termos linguísticos. Aqui ainda é parte deste mapeamento, já são resultados, que são alguns projetos, né, que existem na faculdade. Eu já coordenei esses 2 projetos e é o que nós temos assim de mais, que aparece mais, né? Há vários projetos ocorrendo na universidade, mas estes atendem alunos em maior número, né? Voltado para alunos, professores, servidores. Claro que ainda não está longe de alcançar o que nós gostaríamos de oferecer, mas é o que temos para o momento. Há algumas outras atividades menores que ocorrem também, que são disponibilizadas para a comunidade universitária, né? O desafio ele ainda é grande, né? O Conselho ele tenta promover essa diversidade linguística, que a internacionalização depende muito disso, mas nós ainda estamos assim no começo, caminhando. Acredito que outras universidades também estão num momento parecido com o nosso, mas o importante é que o trabalho existe, está sendo feito, né? E eu espero que nós possamos colher bons frutos ou melhores frutos, né? Cada vez mais com o passar do tempo. Bom, é isso. Agora, eu gostaria de convidar a professora Thelma a iniciar a sua fala.
Boa tarde, good afternoon. Happy Teachers Day, feliz dia dos professores, professoras. Vamos comemorar, né? I'd like to also thank Anna for inviting me to be part of this dialogue. I'm very happy to be here and join my colleagues, longtime friends, to discuss the role of languages in the internationalization of higher education institutions. And in fact, I think I'll be referring more to universities as higher education institutions rather than other forms of organizations. First of all, just to contextualize, what I'm going to present here is the result, partial results of a study that was conducted a few years ago. So it's not an up-to-date information about what's going on in both universities where we carried out the study. But just to set the scene for you in terms of the context where the study took place. So we have been witnessing an increasing formalization of the institutional policies for internationalization, and especially language policies for internationalization. And these policies involve, of course, mobility, virtual or in-person, and also international cooperation. But it seems to me that there is a predominance of one-way flux that is global north to global south, and most of the benefits have been perceived as being mainly in the south rather than in the north. So this is one aspect of internationalization that we could look at and see to what extent the so-called global South can challenge this flux and try to imprint a more equal relationship with the global North institutions. Second point is the centrality of the questions related to languages in this process, as Valdirene has already highlighted, especially in relation to foreign languages. Of course, Portuguese also and other languages, our Libras, for instance, and other languages, indigenous languages, are important in this process as well, especially if we think about a more equal partnership with institutions in the global North. And that means that this centrality has concentrated mainly in offering opportunities for the academic community and staff, even administrative staff, to learn other languages in order to participate in this process. Also, there is this increasing adoption of English as a medium of instruction, and especially at the postgraduate level. I don't see this happening with the same strength at the undergraduate level, although there are some institutions that, like FGV, for instance, that offers a full degree in English at the undergraduate level. Most of the offerings have been in the area of postgraduate programs. So it's still at very, very early stages. Only a very small proportion of teachers and students are having classes in English as an indicator, so to speak, of internationalization. Of course, there are other languages that are also being taught or used as a means of instruction, but we can see that English is still the predominant language of instruction when it comes to teaching in another language rather than Portuguese. Also, we have seen that this is an area that have been attracted the interest of applied linguists in Brazil and has become an important focus of research. So the study that I'm going to present to you very briefly was carried out with other colleagues, Alessia Kogo from Goldsmith, London, Luciana Calvo from Wayne, and also Michelle Elcadri from Well. These two institutions, or these two universities, had many similarities in terms of their histories. They were funded about 5 decades ago, and they have similar profiles. Both institutions at the time when we carried out the study between 2018 to 2019 had documents about their internationalization policies and also plans for the use of foreign languages in their internationalization programs. Of course, a lot of this has been pushed by the funding agencies that were at the time requiring institutions to produce these kind of documents. So I would say it's a more top-down writing up of these documents rather than something that emerged from the communities themselves in terms of saying, okay, this is an important aspect of our work and we'd like to move forward in this direction. And I think especially of the CAP Sprint program that funded the internationalization programs of the universities that were further ahead in terms of their internationalization initiatives, and also the Languages Without Borders program. They require this kind of documents. And of course, these two universities also produce these documents in order to participate. And so the learning and the use of foreign languages with the predominance of English, of course, were included in the strategic planning for the next 5 years, and this document has been renewed for the next 5 years. So it's still there as part of the planning. There were different levels of adoption of EMI in both universities. One was, I would say, keener on implementing EMI. The other was more relaxed about it. And of course, in both cases, it was still a very small proportion of the staff involved in this. So the study was conducted by using questionnaires, semi-structured interviews, and focus groups between April and June 2019. And all the professors involved in the postgraduate programs in both the institutions were invited to participate if they had interest in EMI or whether they had already taught using English as the medium of instruction. So we had only 12 students from University A and 7 from University B. And also we interviewed a few of them and also had focus groups with the participation of students, postgraduate students. The results were that in general, the attitude towards EMI was positive. Most of these teachers who were involved in EMI did not necessarily receive any kind of preparation. They were doing it mainly out of their interest, personal interest. Some of them saying they were happy to be able to practice their English. Others because they felt their students would benefit from the experience, but the institutional pressure was not very strong at that point. We'll have to find out whether today the situation is different. And the teachers, so they resorted to their own experiences, either abroad or their own teaching experiences, in order to adjust their teaching now using another language that was not necessarily familiar to the students either. So it's they were a bit anxious about this, although some were more confident, but others and the majority expressed a bit, they were a bit concerned about having to use another language, and that, for instance, threatening their authority or the impression that the students would have of their expertise, or that it would affect their credibility as researchers. So we looked at the positive aspects and also the concerns. The study the part of the study that I am discussing here is mainly related to the concerns. And so some of these concerns were the increasing difficulty of learning the content. So they felt that because the students were having classes in English, they would have more difficulty understanding the subject, whatever was being taught to them. So because they would have difficulty accessing the language, and therefore they would lose somehow in terms of those who had a better command of English. Also, they felt that the situation would produce a hierarchy of the languages, with Portuguese being the lesser language, the language that would have a negative effect, because if they wanted to do anything in Portuguese, they would be disadvantaged in relation to those who were doing it in English. So they felt, okay, this is a situation that exemplifies or illustrates the hierarchy of languages. And we can see that English is the language of science, and so we have to encourage students to have classes and learn more about English and also be able to publish in English. And we can see here that EMI in Brazil is not just about teaching the content through English, but there is also the expectation that the learners, the students will also learn English as a kind of side effect of having classes in English. There was, of course, the emotional impact on both teachers and students, because they, as I said, some of them felt they were threatened, their credibility being somehow harmed by this experience, and they lacked confidence to use English in class. So that also resulted in a larger amount of time to prepare classes, because teachers felt they needed to know the exact words to use, so that it also increased their workload. Also, they felt that the offer of classes in English would put students away. So some students wouldn't enroll in their courses because the classes were in English. So they felt that it was a kind of exclusionary practice, because that wouldn't be inviting to those who didn't feel confident to take classes in English. And that would also, of course, affect participation of those who decided to enroll but didn't feel totally confident in their proficiency. So there is this feeling of exclusion that was felt by the students and the teachers, that would be something harmful in the process. And also the identity effects, because colleagues could see these teachers differently. They could either think they were trying to show off, or they were trying to distinguish themselves from the others. So there were also concerns about that, to how they would be seen by their colleagues if they decided to teach in English. So here are just some of the quotes from the data. This one was about the nível de inglês, como que os professores seriam entendidos pelos alunos, porque dependendo do conteúdo, que já é difícil, né? Como que essa dificuldade seria exacerbada se ele fosse dado, então, em inglês. Another metaphor was this kind of a thorn in the flesh that English is, although, and of course here is the expectation that EMI classes would lead to better learning of English, that they although it was a thorn in the flesh, they would have to learn it. It's like this unstoppable train that Mercado would refer to. The other one says there was no choice, and I don't like English. If I could spend my money in learning another language, I would take Spanish. But if I speak Spanish, in my academic life, it will won't benefit me, except for leisure. So it's something that we have to do. So this inevitability of English was also reinforced by those who were attending these classes. This one, which means that the teachers also project some identities on the students who do not decide to take classes, they are considered lazy, preguiçosos, porque esse é um desafio, e os alunos que não quisessem participar, né, dessas aulas seriam vistos como preguiçosos, né? Seria então uma experiência. This is a kind of experience that would project certain identities on the teachers who were teaching in English and those who were not. So it's a kind of creating a distinction, EMI, non-EMI teachers. Anna is asking about students being compulsory, if enrollment is compulsory. No. All these courses are offered in English are not compulsory, because you cannot offer or make compulsory a course in English, because this is not something that has been legislated before. So if I take a postgraduate, I enroll in a postgraduate program, and the program does not tell me that the courses will be in English, I cannot be required to attend classes in English. So it's just electives, optional courses, and students can take them if they wish. So it's not compulsory. So just coming to the end now. So after conducting these studies, we made some recommendations, and we shared the results with the administration of both universities, and published a few papers on that. So the paper that I'm referring here, I'm going to give the reference in a minute, and that was published in a Revista Brasileira de Linguística Aplicada. But that's when we focused only on the challenges and the concerns of teachers who are doing EMI. And as I said in the beginning, just a very, very, very small proportion of teachers were doing that. We were interested in exploring the potential of English as a lingua franca to diminish anxieties and also give more flexibility to the teachers, not assuming that because it's EMI, all the classes or everything has to be in English. So we felt that there was a potential for critical perspectives on English as a lingua franca to subsidize these language policies for internationalization, because it's a view of the use of English that does not collide with the idea of multilingualism. Also, the understanding that AMI does not imply that it's just English, and that it means challenging beliefs that teachers have when they start this, because some of them thought because it's EMI, they could not use Portuguese or any other resource in the classroom to help students learn the content. And also, EMI is not disconnected from other issues involving the internationalization of higher education institutions in a context that seems to be reproducing inequalities in this very competitive and complex environment. So EMI has to be included in discussions and reflections by the academic community in terms of its role in the internationalization, but also its role in creating inequalities, both in intra-institutional inequalities, but also inter-institutional inequalities. Sorry. And I'd like to thank the institutions that made this study possible, CNPq, British Council, and Fundação Araucária. And this is the reference to the paper that I drew on to give you these very, very brief description of how EMI is happening in these two institutions. I'll be very happy to listen to David and others, other colleagues' comments, as well as take questions at the end. Thank you so much.
Olá, boa tarde a todos. Eu sou o professor Gabriel Amorim. Prazer estar falando com vocês aqui essa tarde. Agradecer a Ana pelo convite de dialogar com esses profissionais, frente à professora Thelma, que esteve na minha banca de doutorado sobre esse mesmo tema. E o título da minha apresentação de hoje é Internacionalização do Ensino Superior e o Papel das Línguas, Insights do Norte Global e do Sul Global. Como a Thelma, eu também vou reportar um estudo que nós conduzimos recentemente com o mesmo título. E no final eu vou botar a referência para vocês do estudo, caso vocês tenham interesse em ler. Tá bom? Primeiramente, eu trago uma definição já costumeira de internacionalização como sendo um processo intencional de se integrar uma dimensão internacional, intercultural e global ao ensino superior. Essa definição é do DeWitt e tem sido usada recentemente, há algum tempo já, desde 2015, nos nossos trabalhos com relação a esse tema. E aí, como eu falei, eu estou reportando um estudo que foi conduzido por mim e por duas outras pesquisadoras de duas outras instituições aqui do Brasil, a Kíria Finardi, da UFES, e Simone Sarmento, do Rio Grande do Sul, que fez parte de um grande projeto que ainda está em vigência, do FAPES Universal, em que nós pesquisamos internacionalização, tanto no Sul Global como no Norte Global. Mais recentemente, a gente tem tido um foco maior em instituições do Sul Global, realmente investigando essas parcerias mais Sul-Sul. Para quem pesquisa a área de internacionalização há um tempo, como eu, a gente tem visto um movimento muito grande de contextualização dessa internacionalização. Nas nossas pesquisas, a gente tem costume de caracterizar a internacionalização no Brasil como uma internacionalização reativa, realmente reagindo a editais públicos, como foi o caso do Ciências Sem Fronteiras, do Idiomas Sem Fronteiras, do CAPES-Print, que a professora Thelma acabou de dizer, sempre reagindo a esses editais de fomento do governo federal, principalmente do governo federal. E isso teve aspectos positivos e aspectos negativos. E aí a gente traz para esse estudo que eu vou reportar para vocês hoje, brevemente, alguns detalhes só, algumas assumptions ou algumas pressuposições, essa é a melhor tradução para assumptions, pressuposições que temos, na verdade, sobre a internacionalização e o papel das línguas nesse processo. A primeira é que a internacionalização afeta as instituições de ensino superior e é afetada também por circunstâncias geopolíticas em diferentes níveis, sendo que as instituições do Norte Global geralmente são mais beneficiadas. A segunda pressuposição que nós temos é que alguma evidência pode ser encontrada de concentração das inovações, das citações, das publicações, da concentração de estudantes internacionais no Norte, quando comparado ao Sul. E aí, como eu disse, as instituições do Sul Global é relegado uma situação de passiva, como Lima e Maranhão, em 2009, caracterizaram esse fenômeno, sendo que as instituições brasileiras ou as instituições do Sul Global geralmente enviam mais alunos ao exterior do que recebem, dando a elas uma caracterização de passiva, incipiente, como a gente já caracterizou, porque ainda está em processo de desenvolvimento, relegada a uma posição periférica de invisibilidade, principalmente no que tange os University Rankings, ou os rankings universitários, que, por sua vez, podem ser um tanto quanto enviesados também. e nos coloca numa posição, geralmente, de competição com o Norte, usando a metáfora desse banquete global, a gente estaria mais na posição de servidão do que de convidados a sentar nessa mesa do banquete. Então, vamos ao estudo. Né? O estudo, como eu falei, foi conduzido por esses 3 pesquisadores, um da UFG, um da UFES, um da FURGS, no Rio Grande do Sul. E o nosso interesse era investigar essa possível correlação entre língua e a localização geopolítica e seu impacto no processo de internacionalização de uma instituição. Né, os nossos instrumentos de coleta de dados foi uma checklist online, observação é a melhor tradução, observação dos sites institucionais dessas instituições, e entrevistas com stakeholders. Me ajuda uma tradução de stakeholder, pelas partes interessadas das universidades. Nós tivemos 11 universidades localizadas em 8 países diferentes participando desse estudo, sendo que 5 foram do sul global, 3 no Brasil, 1 na Turquia e 1 na Malásia, e 6 do norte global. 2 em Portugal, 1 na Inglaterra, 1 na Espanha, 1 na Itália e 1 na Suíça. Vamos lá. O principal instrumento de coleta de dados foi essa checklist, que foi adaptada de uma matriz que eu desenvolvi no meu estudo de doutorado, que compreendia, na época, 86 indicadores para avaliação do ensino superior, da internacionalização do ensino superior no Brasil. Essa lista de 86 indicadores foi revisada e alguns indicadores foram desmembrados, e aí nós revisamos essa matriz e ela tornou a ser composta por uma lista de 93 indicadores. E como nós queríamos um instrumento enxuto, conciso para esse estudo em específico, a gente chegou ao fim em 17 perguntas que foram divididas em 3 dimensões, como língua, mobilidade acadêmica e inovação, sendo que nesse estudo em especial nós analisamos somente as questões de 1 a 5, que eram relativas à língua, tá bom? E aí agora eu vou apresentar para vocês alguns dos dados que nós produzimos com esse estudo. Primeiro, uma grande overview, uma tradução para overview. Uma visão geral, um panorama. Obrigado, minhas tradutoras estão aqui do lado. Um grande panorama geral das instituições. Primeiro, as no norte global, né, a da Inglaterra, com 38 mil alunos, posição 83 no ranking local, com 11 mil alunos em mobilidade. Na Suíça, nós temos uma instituição com 7.800 alunos, terceira posição no ranking local, 165 alunos em mobilidade in, 199 em mobilidade out. A primeira instituição de Portugal, na posição 16 no ranking local, com aproximadamente 8 mil alunos, bastante alunos em mobilidade, representando 5,3% da sua população total. A instituição da Itália, com 65 mil alunos, né, uma instituição bem grande, com 6,6% de sua população em mobilidade. A instituição da Espanha, também uma instituição bastante grande, com 50 mil alunos e 9,3% de sua população em mobilidade. A outra em Portugal, com 15 mil alunos, né, e 3,8% de sua população né, em mobilidade. A primeira instituição no Brasil, agora representando o sul global, né, na posição 33 no ranking local, uma instituição bastante grande também, com 23.800 alunos. E aí a gente começa a ver os dados de mobilidade como eles caem, né, menos de 1% da população dessa universidade em mobilidade. Eu vou falar das outras 2 do Brasil, lá no fim, né, 2 instituições bastante grandes também, uma com 22 mil alunos e outra com 45 mil. e sendo essa de 45 mil alunos, com menos de 1% de sua população em mobilidade. E um dado surpreendente para a gente foi essa instituição na Malásia, que está em primeiro lugar no ranking local, com 29 mil alunos, quase 30 mil alunos, e 19,5% de sua população em mobilidade. A Malásia é um caso à parte, porque ela, apesar de ser uma instituição de um país considerado sul global, ela adota uma postura de norte global dentro do seu contexto. Ela é um grande hub de mobilidade de alunos asiáticos daquele contexto ali, que vem para a Malásia por conta de o país ter o inglês como sua língua oficial também. Passando para o próximo, Júlia, por favor. Nossa primeira pergunta para essas instituições foi se eles possuem um documento um instrumento de política linguística, como a Valdirene apresentou aqui da UFG. Nós temos um conselho de política linguística e um comitê de línguas e de idiomas, né? E aí vamos ver os dados aqui das instituições do norte e do sul global. O cenário está um pouco parecido, tanto para as instituições do norte quanto as instituições do sul. A gente vê, por exemplo, que metade das instituições do norte global, sendo as duas de Portugal e a da Inglaterra, não possuem documento que seja um guia para a universidade. E 3 instituições, a da Espanha, da Itália e da Suíça, manifestaram que tem um documento que guia esse processo. E já nas instituições do sul global, nós temos a maioria, aí por coincidência, as 3 instituições brasileiras possuindo um documento que guie esse processo no que tange as línguas estrangeiras. E a Malásia, negou, né, disse que não tinha esse documento, e a Turquia não sabia informar se eles têm esse documento. E como eu falei anteriormente, né, o processo de internacionalização das universidades no Brasil, a gente tem caracterizado esse processo como um processo reativo, e como eu disse, né, geralmente a gente reage a um edital. E eu lembro quando a época do edital do CapSprint, que as universidades, para concorrer ao fomento, elas precisavam ter aprovado em seus conselhos superiores, suas câmaras superiores, um documento de política linguística para a universidade. Talvez seja por isso que essas 3 instituições no Brasil já tenham esse documento aprovado de antemão. Nossa outra pergunta na nossa checklist foi em relação a línguas para diferentes propósitos, como a língua para admissão, qual é a língua que é usada, ou quais línguas são usadas para admissão, para comunicação interna e externa, para ensino e para pesquisa. Essas foram as 4 opções que nós demos. E aí vocês podem ver que nas instituições do norte global, em Portugal, por exemplo, tem todos os quesitos completos: admissão, comunicação, ensino e pesquisa. As 2 de Portugal, a da Espanha também, a da Itália, né? A da Inglaterra, que é um grande hub de receber alunos internacionais, né, alunos estrangeiros para estudar lá, ela só usa outras línguas para fins de pesquisa. A da Suíça também contemplou todos os quesitos. Já as instituições do sul global, a gente vê as instituições brasileiras até numa posição de destaque, né? Utilizando língua para comunicação, diferentes línguas, né? Para comunicação, para ensino e para pesquisa, ficando apenas línguas para admissão, que no caso é só o português. Né? Já a instituição da Malásia, eles usam diferentes línguas para ensino somente, e a da Turquia, que também é um grande hub de grande número de alunos estrangeiros, dos 4 propósitos: para admissão, para comunicação, para ensino e para fins de pesquisa. A nossa próxima consulta a essas universidades foi em relação à oferta de cursos de línguas para a comunidade acadêmica. E aí a gente pode ver que as instituições do Norte Global, elas, em sua grande maioria, ofertam cursos tanto para professores, para alunos e quanto para o staff, para os servidores, né? Com exceção de uma instituição de Portugal que somente oferta esse tipo de curso para os seus alunos. Já no Sul Global, a gente observa que as instituições no Brasil, com exceção de uma só, ofertam para cursos de línguas para professores, para alunos e para staff, com exceção dessa única que só assinalou que oferta esses cursos para professores e alunos e não para o staff. As instituições a instituição da Malásia e da Turquia somente ofertam esse tipo de curso para os seus docentes. Isso vai muito ao encontro do que a Valdirene falou no início, das oportunidades que a gente tem, pelo menos aqui na UFG, que foi uma das instituições investigadas, que oferta cursos para a sua comunidade acadêmica na sua totalidade, né, de professores, alunos e seu staff. A nossa outra consulta para as universidades investigadas foi em relação às línguas utilizadas para comunicação externa e interna. Nós perguntamos se essa instituição tem um e-mail ou outro meio de comunicação que recebe e envia documentos em língua estrangeira ou língua adicional, e essas foram as respostas que nós obtivemos. Nas instituições do Norte Global, apenas 2 instituições disseram que sim, e uma instituição em Portugal e uma instituição na Espanha. A outra instituição de Portugal assinalou que não tem. A instituição da Itália não soube dizer se existe esse tipo de comunicação, esse tipo de troca de documentos em outras línguas. E a instituição da Inglaterra e da Suíça também disseram que não. E como eu falei, a Inglaterra é um grande hub, né, entre os 4 países que mais recebem alunos de estrangeiros, né? A Inglaterra é um deles, Inglaterra, Estados Unidos, Austrália e Canadá, né, os 4 países não coincidentemente falantes de língua inglesa. E interessante observar que eles, apesar de serem um grande hub de recepção de alunos estrangeiros, não possuem comunicação em outras línguas. As instituições no Brasil, no Sul Global, né, 2 assinalaram que sim, que tem esse tipo de tramitação de documentos e e-mails em outras línguas. Uma instituição no Brasil disse não, a da Malásia disse não, e a da Turquia não soube responder a essa pergunta. Com relação à oferta de EMI Courses, de cursos de EMI, de inglês como meio de instrução, nós perguntamos se esses tipos de cursos são oferecidos para estudantes de graduação ou estudantes de pós-graduação ou ambos. A gente pode observar que nas instituições do Norte Global, e nas instituições como um todo, né, praticamente todas assinalaram que oferecem esse tipo de curso na pós-graduação, né? Sendo que na Itália, na Inglaterra e na Suíça, eles também ofertam para a graduação. Já no Sul Global, né, a grande maioria oferta para a pós-graduação, com exceção de uma instituição no Brasil que não soube responder a pergunta, mas nós temos uma instituição no Brasil e a da Turquia que ofertam também no nível de graduação. Algumas conclusões, alguns insights que a gente teve a partir dessa pesquisa, que a gente está continuando ainda, agora a gente está expandindo muito mais essa pesquisa para o Sul Global, né, que das 11 universidades que estão localizadas em 8 países diferentes e de regiões geopolíticas diferentes, existe sim né, uma correlação entre o papel das línguas estrangeiras e o processo de internacionalização. A gente tinha como pressuposição que as universidades que falavam inglês, como a da Inglaterra ou as do Norte Global, atrariam mais alunos internacionais. Mas esse processo, né, deu uma diminuída com relação, principalmente depois do Brexit, da pandemia e das últimas, como é que fala, visa regulations, das últimas imposições com relação ao visto de estudante para esses países. Então, ainda há uma correlação entre o papel das línguas em geral, em inglês em particular, e a região geopolítica, com universidades falantes de língua inglesa, estou tentando traduzir na cabeça, que estão localizadas no norte global, ainda dando maior benefício a essas instituições. As instituições de falantes de língua inglesa, né, que estão oferecendo cursos em EMI, né, cursos de inglês como língua de instrução, se beneficiam mais desse processo de internacionalização da educação. Ainda se percebe muito, apesar de a gente ter focado a nossa pesquisa nesse paper em especial nas línguas estrangeiras, ainda há um grande foco e um grande impacto na internacionalização das instituições em termos de mobilidade acadêmica, principalmente para e no norte global. Eu vou deixar aqui meu contato para vocês, para quem tiver interesse em dialogar mais sobre essa pesquisa, e deixo também a referência do artigo que nós publicamos recentemente. Muito obrigado.
Hi, I've planned to share with you data from a larger study, which was published in an article, and it's not moving. Just a second, please. Yeah, what's it mean? So sorry about that. Anyway, this is the article. And as you can see, it's entitled Language and Internationalization in Brazilian Higher Education, from Policy to Practice. The study was conducted by a team of 8 researchers from 3 universities: the University of Birmingham in the UK, the Federal University of Minas Gerais, and the University of Brazil, the University of Brasilia, both in Brazil. The team was led by Professor Marilyn Martin-Jones, Professor Maria Luisa Castanheira, and Dr. Isabel Magalhães. I dedicate this presentation to Dr. Elizabeth Chilton. Liz sadly passed away in 2023, but she will always be remembered for her great sense of humor and for the important contributions that she has made to this study. Moving on to the study itself, it investigated the ways in which English language policy initiatives have been unfolding in 2 federal universities in Brazil, which we have named Alpha and Beta. Both universities had 50,000 to 67,000 students on large metropolitan settings. In addition, both had been awarded CAPES-Sprint funding, which creates space for internationalization at home without the need for costly investments in academic mobility. The project had 4 main objectives: to identify policy initiatives taken by the universities in response to the CAPSPRINT internationalization program, to build on account of the interpretation and understandings of these initiatives by research participants working on different institutional scales and in different academic disciplines, to document the lived experiences of these policy processes and institutional debates emerging around them, including debates relating to language, to provide an account of the ways in which the day-to-day academic literacy practices were being reshaped, especially the use and production of texts in different languages on and offline. Here I report on data collected in the first phase of the study and which explored the three objectives in the Alpha University. In this first phase, we gathered policy-related documents and conducted policy-related interviews with university staff who had managerial roles on different scales of their respective institutions. In other words, they were closely involved in creating, interpreting, and appropriating internationalization policies. You may have noticed then that this study adopts as its theoretical framework the ethnography of language policy. As proposed by Johnson, language policy should be viewed as complex, intertwined processes of policy creation, interpretation, and appropriation. He also emphasized that appropriation can occur in diverse ways, ranging, for example, from acceptance and compliance to adaptation or significant recasting of policy prescriptions. In this way, a clear distinction can be achieved in studies of language policy making between policy making power, policy interpretation by different social actors, and agentive responses to policy. Therefore, I start the analysis by tracing the recurring themes in the policy documentation adopted by the Alpha University. I then contrast the content of the university policy document with the actual lived experiences of policy processes that key social actors in the university shared with us via qualitative interviews. Two sections of the university's internationalization plan, from now on IP, are discussed. The one which refers to the postgraduate programs, the focus area of CAPSPRINT, and the one which specifically covers language policy. The section on the postgraduate programs links the aims of the internationalization of these programs to the plan guidelines for engagement with national and global issues. It also emphasizes the university's commitment to offering its academics an opportunity to experiencing linguistic and cultural diversity at home. Additionally, it presents the main internationalization objectives of the postgraduate programs. They are to improve teaching quality, increase the visibility of the university, increase the enrollment of international students, enable the participation of academic staff in international institutions and networks, and increase internationalization of the postgraduate programs. Three main themes related to language emerge in this section: the prioritization of English, while account is taken of research and teaching other languages, and the need for ample provision for the teaching of Portuguese for international students and academic staff from abroad. These themes were also echoed in the language policy section of the document. In this section, language is referred to in a much wider range of ways. Terms such as foreign languages, multilingual, English as a medium of instruction, and other languages are mentioned. Other more specific terms and phrases are also used, anticipating greater linguistic diversity on the university campus, and at the same time, institutional links of an international nature. These terms include languages for intercomprehension, second language, English, and languages of countries with which the institution has strong partnerships. In addition to these terms, Portuguese is mentioned as the language of adoption and as Portuguese for foreigners. In fact, the only languages explicitly named in this section are English and Portuguese. English is represented as being of higher value than other languages, not only for being overtly named, but for being the only to be mentioned with reference to the branding of the university. English is the language chosen to showcase the university. Although a high value is assigned to English, it is argued that there should be a balance between the selection of languages for university activities. This is illustrated with reference to two types of university activities. Firstly, the submission of dissertations and theses in other languages as appropriate to each specific field. And secondly, the launch of multilingual journals. Most activities of this kind were endorsed, provided that a balance between languages could be achieved. In this way, the use of languages other than English could be protected. The promotion of Portuguese as an additional language is also highlighted. I now move to considerations about how this policy document has been interpreted and then appropriated by different social actors who are positioned on different scales within the university hierarchy. I draw on 4 policy-related interviews conducted in the university where this IP was adopted. Edgar Horta joined the university in 2002. He was appointed to the post of Vice Rector for the period between November 2016 and November 2020, with internationalization being one of his specific tasks. Sara Gomes joined the university in 1996. She was the director of the university's International Relations Office between November 2016 and November 2018. She had already stepped down from this managerial role by the time our project was carried out. Rosa Neto joined the university in 2006. She had been the director of the Institute of Letters since November 2016. This is the largest institute at this university with about 200 lecturers. And Gilberto Maia, who joined the university in 2019. He was coordinating the university's language center. This is a large-scale community outreach program. He was also chairing the language policies for Internationalization Committee, and thus was responsible for a translation project which constituted one of the committee's main activities. In this interview, Edgar Horta confirmed the importance of the IP in the internationalization process of the university. Thus, it appears that the senior management group of the university, under his leadership, had seen the formulation of the IP as the first priority in responding to the CAPES Bridge program. Attention to promoting the visibility of the university within the global higher education market was mentioned a number of times during this interview. Although there were plans to have versions of the university site in Spanish and French, a higher status was clearly given to English over other languages. Portuguese, in turn, was discussed with a specific regard to enhancing provision for teaching the language to visiting scholars and students from outside Brazil, so as to enable them to participate in the day-to-day activities of the university as well as in everyday social contexts. Edgar had a vision of a university with multilingual resources, where there was a balance between the use of English and the use of other languages by Brazilians, and where visiting scholars were encouraged to learn Portuguese, and where some teaching took place in languages other than Portuguese. In concluding, Edgar Horta emphasized that the university had already developed ideas for internationalization prior to 2017, but the CAPS-Sprint program had obliged the senior management to prepare a formal plan, and in the university-wide discussions that followed, they had learned a good deal about the activities of the scholars and research groups based at the university and about the wider impact of their research. One consequence was the identification of directions for interdisciplinary collaboration which had been developed. In her interview, Sara Gomes was asked how the team had embarked on the task of developing an institutional policy on internationalization in response to CAPS-Sprint. She was also asked whether this policy process had been primarily top-down in nature, or whether there had been some opportunities for bottom-up input. In her response, she indicated that they had begun with a survey of existing research groups, with a view to identifying forms of collaboration that were international in nature and those that were not. When asked about the criteria set out in the CAPS-Sprint program for ranking research output, criteria such as assigning higher value to publications in English, Sara expressed her negative viewpoint quite emphatically. She then went on to place the question of university ranking and research assessment in a wider context, making reference to the work of a recently established international language planning policy called PLISIS, which in English is Language Policy and Planning for Science and Higher Education. Their aims are to develop a common regional evaluation system as well as a system for the sharing of knowledge produced regionally in Latin America. Later in the interview, she returned to the question of how excellence in research should be defined. She expressed the view that there was a clear divergence between the criteria used by CAPS-Sprint and by bodies such as PLISIS. Sara Gomes saw this contrast as posing a major challenge for academics and university administrations in countries such as Brazil, since university administrators in leading universities have to look both ways, that is, south-north, south-south. She also noted that the vast majority of Brazilian universities are excluded from the CAPS-Sprint process and that this was an issue of inequality. Rosa Neto has raised 2 key points. The first related to the need for a focus on South-South relationships between university research groups. Therefore, she made a generally positive evaluation of the emphasis that the university's IP placed on building links with other universities in the global South. Secondly, she welcomed the emphasis in the university's IP on maintaining a balance between the use of Portuguese, the teaching of Portuguese as an additional language, the use of English, and the use of other languages such as Spanish and French. Rosa also spoke at some length about the actual process of policy making around internationalization taking place at the university. She indicated that she welcomed the fact that the university's top management team had adopted a relatively inclusive approach. For example, the International Affairs Office had committed itself to inviting heads of departments to meetings with the visiting representatives of universities in other countries. When asked about the views of the policy process expressed by her staff, Rosa indicated that not all members had positive views about the ways in which policy initiatives were being developed at the university. In sum, Rosa was well informed about the ways in which university policy was being created at senior management level in response to CAPS-Sprint. This was due to her role as director of the institute. While she was able to interpret and understand the different initiatives being taken by the university, these policy processes were being interpreted in different ways by the staff in different departments within the institute. Like Sara Gomes, Rosa felt that there needed to be more opportunities for bottom-up engagement with policy initiatives and with the drafting of policy documents. She also argued that a bottom-up approach would enhance active appropriation of policy initiatives among staff in different academic units across the university. As in the interview with Rosa, some of the discussions with Gilberto Maia turned to the management of the policy-making processes in the university. Gilberto noted that there had been limited consultation with those in lower-ranking managerial positions within the university, especially regarding the nature and scope of activities to be undertaken following particular policy initiatives set out in the IP. Being responsible for a translation project, which constituted one of the Language Policies for Internationalization Committee's main activities, Gilberto pointed out that the choice of English, French, and Spanish as the languages for the translations was based on the human resources they had available. Additionally, those carrying out the actual translation had to simply carry out the demands of senior management in the International Affairs Committee. On this occasion, at least, it appears that there had been no room for bottom-up exchange of views about priorities with the members of the International Affairs Committee. While making explicit reference to his positioning within the university hierarchy, he asserts the value of the contribution that they make to internationalization efforts, and specifically to the development of multilingual resources within the university through the practical activities associated with the teaching of different languages. Gilberto also had a fundamental critique of the role of CAP Sprint program in higher education in Brazil. In his words, the CAP Sprint project privileges the universities that already have a certain level of internationalization, and it does not give anything to those that do not have it, those that need to develop in this way. So it maintains the status quo of those who already have levels of internationalization. The main issue highlighted in this study related to the inequality caused by internationalization in general and CAP Sprint Englishization requirements in particular. Despite the mention of South-South partnerships and the protection of other languages in the university's IP, the interviewees raised the issue that, in practice, greater value was being given to the use of the English language and to partnerships with universities in English-speaking countries by policymakers, academics, and students. Another issue reported relates to the language planning policies process itself. It was acknowledged that there had been a change to a more inclusive approach by senior management personnel with regards to internationalization. However, it was felt that much of the decision-making about implementation strategies was still confined to senior management circles. To conclude, the senior management teams of Brazilian universities need to consider ways in which social actors on all scales of university life can participate in the language policy-making processes at work at their institutions. It is only by involving social actors on the ground that policies can effectively be translated into day-to-day practices. So I thank you for your attention and invite you to read the 2024 special issue of Revista Brasileira de Linguística Aplicada, an open access journal, where other aspects of this study is published along the work of other colleagues, such as the paper here presented by Thelma Jimenez. Thank you.
Okay. I can't hear anything, so. Okay. Right. I need the PowerPoint presentation. Right. Okay, fine. Okay. Right. So I'm David Block, and pointing there to the photograph that was on the advertisement for today's session. I would like to thank, by the way, everybody involved in the organization for having me. I'm sorry to disappoint. I won't be wearing my sunglasses today. I hope that nobody was expecting me to. Just a couple of points. You probably noticed my voice is like this. I recently had a kind of bad case of COVID, and I'm still getting over that, and I have a cough, and my voice has ended up like this. I also apologize in a way. I have very mixed views about English medium instruction, Englishization, the spread of English around the world. And I'm sorry I can't speak Portuguese and give my talk in Portuguese, but I just thought I would say that. So the talk today, and my understanding is I will give an order and the slides will change because they're being controlled from there where you are. But as it says here on the right, I'm going to comment on what I see as the most important bits. Now, what I'm going to do is in each case, for each of the three main presentations, just select part of the text and then relate it to my own experience. And my own experience with Emmy is, we can change slides, thank you. This particular study, which was carried out between 2016 and 2019. Now, this came at a time when I really had drifted away from issues in applied linguistics and issues around language. I was really concentrating much more on political economy, Marxist political economy in particular, and really was doing all my reading in sociology and other, economics and other areas like that, and writing about issues of inequality, neoliberalism, and social class. But in the middle of that, with some colleagues at the Universidad de Lleida, which is where I was working at the time, we put together a proposal and got funding from the Spanish state to do a study, you see the title there, in which we wanted to focus on sort of micro-analysis of very specific aspects of ME provision. And there you see the team that I was working with. So what I'm going to be doing is relating some of what I learned from that project and some of the things I've written several papers published, and there's also the book that you see there. Just relate some of the things that I've learned to, as I said, selected bits from the previous three presentations. So we can go to the next slide. The order is slightly different, by the way, because I forgot to change the order, but I'll start with Gabriel. And so here what we have on the left is part of some of the text from the published article that Gabriel and along with Amorin and Sarmiento published in 2024. And I just highlighted in bold just a few of the points that they make. And again, this is a small part. We've heard, listening to Gabriel earlier, there's a whole lot going on in this study and this paper. But looking at almost all the universities in Europe seem to be aware of the important role that languages play in the process of internationalization in higher education. That leads me to think, if we move to the right, if I'm looking at where I am in Catalonia, so in the northeast part of Spain, but an autonomous community and also historical community, if you like, and bilingual, where we have Catalan and Spanish. And it really makes me think about how the introduction of EMI has upset a kind of balance that was developing. Certainly from the late 1970s onwards, the interest was in promoting Catalan medium instruction across education. And of course, you would like, if you're looking at MA dissertations, PhD theses, and that sort of thing, what language are they being written in, Spanish or Catalan? Because that was sort of the concern going back over 40 years ago. When we were doing this study about 8 years ago, I think 7 years ago, I had some statistics where it said in the university where we were doing the research, 40% of PhD theses were being written in Catalan, 40% in Spanish, and 20% in English. But I suspect the 20% in English were primarily in STEM disciplines, so science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and such things, and medical research as well. But I find it interesting as well that the intersection of IMI is like the students get to the university and they're told it's, in some cases, it's better to do some of your courses in English. And you look at the amount of investment that goes on in education in Catalonia, in promoting Catalan and making it the internet is down. What does that mean? Oh, okay. Okay. I need someone to confirm that I should continue. It's yes, Murphy's Law. So okay, I'm live. Okay, I need the PowerPoint again. Yeah. Okay. Okay, good. So what I was saying, I was talking about, we need the third slide. No, back one, please. Yeah, okay. Yeah, so I was talking about on the right-hand side about Catalan Spanish balance, but and this particular comment got me thinking about that we have to be aware the importance of languages, but again, it could be Portuguese and English with regard to English, or it could be in the case I'm dealing with here. I'll move on from that one. The second bit that I was going to look at was there was a comment about Malaysia standing out with highest rankings and number of international students, and it made me think about. I mean, we could get into discussions of global South and global North and this sort of thing, and how precise those terms actually are, and of course this is a graded scale, if you like. And there's a lot of South in the North and a lot of North in the South, or maybe less North in the South. And so again, where, you know, we look at where academics are located and what they're writing about. But whatever the case, Malaysia does raise some very interesting issues, being a multilingual, multicultural society with heightened ethnic divisions. And of course, you have a majority ethnic Malaysian population, 65, 70%, 20+% Chinese, and then maybe 6-7% Indian. And of course, there's a lot of balancing that goes on. There are also economic divisions along those lines, with the Chinese and Indian communities being particularly successful economically. And I put divided loyalties because I think a lot of places in the world, there's also a kind of leapfrogging effect. And of course, inequality has been mentioned in all the papers. And you know, this idea that somebody could just, you know, you could basically think in terms of all the education for your child in English, and you know, just going straight, and certainly in higher education, this sort of thing, and not really having a kind of loyalty, if you like, to the nation state so much, and the and local language and culture, right? So these are just things that kind of come to mind. The final thing is the convergence and interconnection between the role of languages and institutions involved in the process. I kind of took from this, and also other parts of the discussion in the paper, this idea of internationalization as a uniformizing process. And of course, going back to when people wrote a lot more about globalization, using the term globalization, and there was a lot of talk about cultural homogenization. The sociologist George Ritzer had this idea of McDonaldization, and so every place, everywhere, everybody starts, you know, acting in the same way, consuming in the same way. You start finding the same, you know, commercial outlets everywhere, that sort of thing. And certainly with regard to the spread of ME, we are seeing a homogenization, if you like, of content being offered. If you're going to do an MA in TESOL, for example, you're going to have very similar content if it's offered, you know, English medium instruction in the United States, for example, and if there's a program in Barcelona that's being offered completely in English, it's going to have very similar content, and people we think along the, there's so many things that start becoming very similar, and the only difference is the backdrop where it's actually taking place. So the next slide, please. Yeah, thank you. So this one is about Thelma's paper, and I like this. This is actually in the article, and it's a very helpful summary of the issues she identifies as the unintended consequences. I'm missing something on the right. No. Oh. That's interesting. There's missing text on the right of the slide. 1 second, I'll need to check. I've got a printout here. That's right. Okay. Anyway, you know, I could comment on all these, but I won't. And again, Thelma did have something to say about them already. But negative impact on learning, I think, is a quite interesting one. One of the things I've always encountered here is whether ME courses are being sold as like for like. So in a Brazilian university, if you offer the same course in engineering, where there's a lot of mathematical formulas and, you know, a lot of talk about the you know, mathematical problems, if you offer that in Portuguese and people are conceptualizing in their L1 Portuguese about mathematics, and then you offer it in English, which, depending on the level of English of the students and their you know, how much they think in English, so to speak, are we offering like for like? I mean, are they able to do the same amount of content? My experience, again, the study I was involved in, and looking around a little bit, and anecdotal evidence, is that this is not the case. And even talking to some professors would say, well, if I teach in, you know, in Spanish or Catalan, I'm a totally different person, and I can do a lot more content. Whereas if I'm doing it in English, I feel like I'm doing less, because I'm spending more time like over explaining, right? If not sometimes translating, if you like. The comments I was going to make, they're not on the right there. I don't know why they're not appearing on the screen, but some additions, you know, sort of unintended consequences. And one of the things that comes up and doesn't come up is domain loss. And domain loss goes back a long way. I've had conversations and even, you know, discussions and arguments with people about this. I believe in domain loss. I believe that the notion that if you don't use a language for a particular domain of activity, that language no longer serves that purpose over time, because the domain of activity evolves, and even the vocabulary might not catch up, you know, might keep up in a particular language. So if everything's being done in English, It's English that becomes the language of medicine, for example, internationally. And other languages around the world, big languages like Portuguese and French, smaller languages like Catalan or Danish, whatever, are not used for these purposes. The PhD work is not being done, publications are not being done in these languages. So I think almost commonsensically, you'd have to think these languages start to lose out. So I think that that's an unintended consequence of ME and Englishization in general of academia, because it has to do with publications, which is also very important. The other thing is I'm thinking about, what happens in situ, what actually happens when you start watching English medium instruction take place in front of, if you're observing a class. And, if people believe in sort of translanguaging strategies and they say, well, just any language you want, you could go back and forth between Portuguese and English, for example, and that's not a problem. But I think the expectation, the way programs are written in many cases is that you will, sorry, I was looking at a message, that everything will be done in English, right? And so I found it interesting in the study. There was one case of a professor who was teaching using Catalan. I mean, she normally would teach in Catalan. She was teaching engineering course in English. And it was interesting the way she used Catalan. She would use Catalan for two purposes. One was she would go off on more personal things. So she'd be teaching the content, and then the students, to wake them up, she might make reference to a football match, Barca, Barca played football, there's a match or something, and start talking about that in Catalan. Now, did you see the match? That sort of thing, kind of wake the students up. And when she talked this way, she used very colloquial language, speaking in Catalan. Then the other thing she did was if the content was really heavy and she had like a really long explanation in English, she would provide a little concise summary in Catalan in addition to that, just to check and make sure they were getting it. So I thought that was quite interesting. And of course, there are lots of different practices, but I think the expectation on the outside, and maybe from higher echelons of administration, when we say ME, we mean everything. The materials are in English, information about the course is in English, administrative tasks related to the course in English, and it's being taught in English all the time, right? And the students are speaking in English, and that's another issue, but I won't go into that, but maybe we can talk about it later. The other issue that comes up, and this is mentioned by Thelma, but the thing about identity, and I think about disciplinary identities, which is a term from Ken Highland. And what we ran into in our study was we were looking for cases, and there are a couple of publications that do this, like, where can we find evidence that these engineering instructors are acting as English teachers, that they're actually maybe correcting the English of their students or making some comment about it. Oh, okay. So I think, the issue of, very often they would say, I'm not an English teacher, I don't do that. That was sort of the response in general we were encountering. However, we did find cases where they said, well, of course, they can't just speak any English. I'm thinking in terms of when I give papers at conferences, so I do have some notion. But in general, there was an island. And sometimes it seemed to be almost like looking down on it. English teaching is a lower profession. But the other side of it was they just said, I'm not qualified to do that. So I thought that was an interesting case. And then the other thing was really, there are different models of ME. You could have ME in what's considered an English-speaking country, in which case it's sort of a natural course of events. You could have ME as a deliberate internationalization policy in a place where English is not normally used. And you could have ME for cases where you have a lot of international students and staff. And so you have this truly international environment, so you use English as a lingua franca. I think the second one is kind of interesting because sometimes what we were looking at were classes that might have one Erasmus student from another European Union country, in which case English was justified. You could use English because you have to cater this one student and do it all in English. But really, there were some classes where you had 20 students. They were all Catalan Spanish bilinguals. The teacher was as well. And I think an anthropologist from Mars, comes down to Earth, goes into that class and say, okay, let me get this straight. All of these people speak Catalan and Spanish, and yet they're doing everything in English. What's that about? Right? So I think that sounds silly perhaps, but I think it's actually a valid question. We can go to the next slide, please. Try to move things along. Yeah. Okay. I'm sorry, there's too much text here, but I was looking at Anna's paper, and I was taking, I kept taking bits and pieces. So here, there are 2 bits from interviews, which are in the original in Portuguese. And I thought the first one was interesting about this idea of preparation, preparing both people teaching and the students, and how they construct science, in another language, especially English, although other languages are mentioned. And the second one is about, it's about creating a program, excellence. We could talk about excellence. That's another issue I won't go into today, but the interesting keyword, excellence. But this idea of involving everyone. And I thought about also, is everybody on board with the project in the same way? Does everybody understand, particularly the staff and the students? Do they understand what they're doing when Emmy is introduced? So with regard to the first one about this idea of constructing science in another language, this is not like for like, right? So this quote is one particular type of thing. The quote I reproduce here, originally in Catalan, as you can see. So I'm assuming that we're going to do a little bit of Romance language crossing here. But in Catalan, this was somebody, deputy director of international relations. This guy had an engineering background, and he talks about that, that they will need English because the market is big, and he talks about building and doing something in China, Australia, this whole idea of the global sphere that we're moving in. But I found it very interesting when he says, because if not, we'll end up being a local university. So like the worst thing you could be is a local university, not an international university. And I thought it was a very interesting comment. At the bottom there, I've got something that is about information flows, which kind of coincides with what's on the left, although in a different way. And this was an instructor who primarily spoke in Spanish, so this is in Spanish. And she was very angry because she was expecting a promotion. She got into Emmy because, as she says here, we were promised, this was when the university had its European strategy and they were opening up. So in a way, what she's talking about is the move towards being an international university, although she doesn't use the term. And we would be promoted early. We'd get early promotion because at that time she had a precarious, year-by-year contract. And so she was still on that contract after teaching for 3 years. And so she was very unhappy with that. Eventually, she did get a promotion and she suddenly became more positive about Emmy. But when we did the study, she was quite negative about a lot of things. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yeah, okay. So moving back to English here, this is, English has been prioritized as being the first language to be used. And this is talking about flyers and booklets. And I thought this was quite interesting, having a translation department. The thing about the visiting professors being recruited and then Portuguese for foreigners, because that's very interesting as well. The visiting professors could be you import, English speakers to teach. And I think Portuguese for foreign courses, for foreigners is an interesting thing. And also whether the visiting professors, if they don't speak Portuguese already, if they're put into these courses, that's an interesting policy. I think all of this, what I saw in the 3 papers was interesting. I felt like there was a great deal more organization and thought going into this than I've seen in other contexts in Europe, which is kind of interesting. On the right, I've just quoted from the introduction to the book I co-edited with Sarah Kahn, and we wrote this in this introduction. But one of the things we brought up was to attend an increasing number of international students who have come as a result of international recruitment. You got to have staff who's always prepared to cover all the aspects of their work in English. And this is an interesting thing that's not often written about. You write about you think about the professors, you think about the students, but the support staff who have to deal with students, student inquiries, for example. And like there was one office at the University of Yale, there were 4 people working, only one of them would attend students in English. And if she wasn't there, then the students, if they only spoke English, if they didn't speak Catalan or Spanish, they couldn't communicate. So I thought that was kind of interesting. I mean, my attitude was, why should they speak English? But that's another issue perhaps. But in a university that claims to be Englishized, internationalized, then in a way, the students maybe do have a right to expect that. The other thing was about, at the bottom there, I've highlighted a couple of things about the official bilingualism, what language is privileged. But I was thinking about web pages, because that's also mentioned by Anna on the left. I thought it's quite interesting to look at web pages. There was Francesca Helm and one of her colleagues did an interesting study a few years back looking in Italy at at web pages, English and Italian, and looking at whether in some cases the text in English wasn't actually the same content as the text in Italian. It was slightly different content. And I looked at the web page in Yeda, and they had, it was kind of it was a work in progress, because you'd have some stuff that would say, click here for Catalan, click here for English, click here for Spanish. And when you click for English, sometimes the text would appear mysteriously in Spanish. You know? But there is this issue about, it's a lot of work here. You know, Anna mentions the translation department. So again, not to be taken lightly. Okay, so that's just some thoughts on the 3 articles. If I have time, that I have like 3 minutes, what I was going to do is go to this and the next slide, and I won't have time to do any more. I was going to talk about neoliberalism and all this other stuff, but looking at the backdrop, because what I'm really interested in all this is the backdrop, is the political economic backdrop, and how English is kind of oiling the wheels of the spread of neoliberal economics. But certainly there is a notion of the neoliberal university. It's been written about by several authors. An interesting book by Smith, an Australian author, The Toxic University, which was published in 2017. And combining the content of that book with some other stuff I've been reading is some of the characteristics of this university. And I'm mentioning this because I think it's relevant to Emmy, because I think Emmy forms part of the bigger package. So, you know, there's a marketization of education that's going on. There's a bifurcated and even multifurcated, if you like, if that exists, workforce, but particularly a bifurcated, where you might have people devoted to teaching, less prestigious, and people devoted to research, more prestigious. There's a great deal of specialization, which there always has been, but because time is of the essence today in academia, there's not much time to really be jumping around, you know, and changing topic and that sort of thing. And then some of the big neoliberal citizen comments come in, neoliberal characteristics come in. Individualism, competition, because there's competition between universities across nation state borders even, but there's competition among academics. And there's even the rise of kind of superstar academics as part of what's known as the attention economy, right? And some of the marketing, when you look at conferences of the plenary speakers, is quite interesting. So I think, you know, it's kind of I think we kind of ease into a lot of these things without realize we're doing it. You know, there's also managerialism. There's the audit culture, metrification, you know, counting output, H index, all this sort of stuff going on. And through all of this, the humanities are put into question. And in fact, humanities and social sciences departments are closing all over the world because they just aren't economically viable. Now, this is all related to internationalization as part of the neoliberal university, as part of even the toxic university. Internationalization is a big part of it, pursuing, you know, the global university, and Englishization here appears as a big part of it. Englishization, again, is mediating a lot of what I mentioned previously. But where there is any kind of process like this, we might think of it as a way of shaping, you know, defining and shaping people who are involved. Now, Foucault wrote quite a bit about, in the medical profession, psychology, how there were sort of grids of specification, how there were, you know, on the institutional level, there were definitions of illnesses, non-illnesses. There were definitions of the, you know, of patients as subjects. And he has the idea of the gaze, you know, that you kind of, that the institution is sort of looking at the person and casting onto them a particular identity. So I wonder if there, you know, I've written about this in a couple of publications, the Emmy, or maybe the international gaze that's going on. And the question then comes up, if, you know, if professors today coming into universities are more and more expected to become Emmy instructors as well, apart from knowing their content areas and everything else, what kind of resistance to the gaze is going on, which is kind of purposeful opposition to this, is it going on? And on that note, I'll stop. I don't know what happens now. We apparently have gone over time, but I'm willing to hang around. There's my short career in English medium instruction with some publications, and I will leave this. This will be available to anybody who wants it. I can convert this to a PDF and leave it with the organizer, or the organizers have it actually, so we can do that. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.
todos os palestrantes, né, pelas apresentações tão interessantes, tão informativas. E agora nós vamos ter um momento com... não tem perguntas? Ok, bom, não temos tempo, né? Infelizmente o evento se estendeu um pouquinho mais. Então eu gostaria de agradecer a todas as pessoas que participaram, né? Tanto presencialmente quanto virtualmente. Pode voltar meus slides, por favor? Sim. Próximo. Gostaria de agradecer aos nossos colaboradores, né, o Ui e a Júlia, que nos auxiliaram aqui com os slides, com os equipamentos, né, e o Luciano, que nos deu o suporte técnico, né, sem ele não seria possível a gente realizar esse evento na plataforma. Gostaria de agradecer a todos vocês, né, pela paciência. Bom, enfim, muito obrigada.